Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Alpha Eta Psi chapter of Phi Alpha Theta, I would like to welcome students, parents, faculty to our wonderful initiation of new members. Today we are celebrating the achievements of those students who have consistently demonstrated an excellence in their study of history at Chestnut Hill College. And so we welcome them into Phi Alpha Theta, the National Honor Society for the discipline of history. As an historian, I cannot go on until I tell you something about the history of our society, because it is really a very rich history. It was established at the University of Arkansas on March 17th, 1921, by Professor Nels Andrew N. Cleven. He and his wife frequently chaperoned social activities of campus fraternities and sororities, gatherings that would inspire him for what he termed was the Phi Alpha Theta idea. Cleven had become convinced in his time at the university that a fraternity of scholars was very important to the study of history. And when he talked about a fraternity of scholars, he meant to establish a society that grouped both men and women. And that was a radical idea, pretty much at that time, to invite women to join the society as well. He discovered that there was no such society for history, and he was determined to remedy the deficiency. And so he invited students to his office for a meeting on March 14th to form the University Historical Society, as it was first called. And then 3 days later, the society was officially recognized on March 17th. Now, by chance, a painting depicting ancient Assyria and featuring a six-pointed star of divinity hung on the wall of his classroom. The star became the central symbol of the history fraternity. And in April, the decision was made that the society would be known by the Greek letters Phi Alpha Theta. The total number of initiates since the society's inception exceeds 400,000 nationwide, with about 9,000 new members joining every year through the 970 chapters nationwide. Phi Alpha Theta has more local chapters than any other accredited four-year college honor society. The society is also a charter member of the Association of College Honor Societies. Chestnut Hill College was granted charter membership into the society in 1996. We are one of the oldest discipline-specific honor societies at the college. And over the past 28 years, our students have brought distinction to our chapter, which is known as Alpha Eta Psi. They participated in regional conferences where they won prizes. They were awarded prizes for their presentations. They have also received Phi Alpha Theta grants for graduate study in history. And this is something I wanted to impress upon those of you who are thinking that you may want to do graduate work at one point in history. Graduate study is very costly, as you know, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have all little scholarships. These are not giant scholarships, but we've gotten one student, actually, the last few years, who got a small scholarship that helped her in her graduate study in history. So please, think about that. And so we're very pleased to welcome you today the 4 new members into our chapter. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. David Contasta, the professor of history and chair of the history department, to say a few words of welcome, as well as to share with us some personal reflections on one of, it's probably the most distinguished faculty member and scholar in our very long history at Chestnut Hill, Dr. John Lukacs, who was in the department, I believe, David, for close to 50 years. Yeah. And so I would like him to say a little something about Dr. Lukacs' legacy.
John Lukacs would have turned 100 years old on January 30th of this year. He lived to be 95. He died in May of 2019, and he died in his library in his home, surrounded by about 20,000 books, which is where he would have wanted to be. And John liked to talk about the coincidences of dates, and I think he'd be very happy to know that he was born the same year that this college was founded, and that he turned 100 when the college is turning 100 years old. John was the author of some 37 books, many of them translated into other languages, including Japanese. He wrote extensively, as I think some of you know, about World War II, and among those books are The Last European War and The Duel, the 80-day struggle between Hitler and Churchill. He had a lifelong admiration for Churchill. He believed that Churchill had actually saved Western civilization. And John got to know one of Churchill's grandchildren, who gave him a bundle of cigars that had once belonged to Sir Winston Churchill. They were kind of stale, I think, by that point, but he had them in a special place in his library. When John died, there were obituaries in newspapers all over the world and in many different languages. And one of the universities in Budapest has established a John Lukacs Institute. And often when I would go to historical meetings and people would find that I teach at Chestnut Hill College, they would say, oh, that's where John Lukacs taught. That must be a special place. So we were often known in the wider world through John Lukacs. John was here at the 50th anniversary of the college, and I think that's another date that he would like to be remembered for. And I want to read a little bit from the small history of the college that he wrote, because I think it shows what a wonderful writer he was. And remember, English was his second language. Indeed, all of the books that he wrote were in English to begin with. I think it tells a lot about what John felt towards history and what it meant to him. And so this is what he wrote. He imagined what it was like here in September of 1924 when the first class entered Chestnut Hill College. And I quote him, "The forest outskirts of the placid, often solemnant city of Philadelphia, this was where 15 homesick girls suddenly found themselves separated from the rest of the world on a beautiful September evening. At night, an added row of windows shone about the darkening silhouette of the rows and clumps of trees." And I'll get back to John as a writer as I go on. Students all remembered that John Lukacs, people who had him, would frequently throw out outlandish remarks in the classroom to get them arguing or upset or questioning some long-held belief. And he'd do the same thing with the faculty. He'd come into the faculty lounge and throw out these verbal bombshells to get us arguing with each other about some idea. John was also a good amateur pianist. He particularly liked playing Cole Porter tunes and would sing. His favorite was You're the Tops, if you're familiar with that at all. And he used to play that piano out there in the rotunda. I can just imagine his being out there playing that piano. When I was here as a young professor, I discovered that John and I both were interested in critics of the modern world. I'd written some articles about John Ruskin, Charles Péguy, and Henry Adams. And John encouraged me to write my first book, which turned out to be Henry Adams and the American Experiment. John lived during those years just beyond Valley Forge, where there was that desperate winter during the American Revolution of 1777, 1778. And he lived in those days in a converted schoolhouse out there, and he added to it an octagonal library with a ladder that went around a track so that he could climb up and down to pull out books. The land around this schoolhouse had belonged to his wife's family for some 2 centuries. Later on, he built a new house on that land. It was a cream-colored stucco house that reminded one of a house in Eastern Europe from which he had come. The house overlooked a small lake, and I want to quote what he said about the land, because again, it says something about him as an historian. He wrote in his book, The End of the 20th Century, "Sometimes after dinner, I walk to the grassy slope beyond our terrace. In those moments, the charm of the present is inseparable from the satisfying sense of the past. Because it is good to know that everything I now see is still the same landscape that the American ancestors of my children saw 50, 100, 150, and 200 years ago." It was this sense of the past that caused John Lukas to call himself a reactionary, not a conservative. He said that he was not conservative, even though many people thought that he was. In his memoir, Confessions of an Original Sinner, which I think is rather interesting. In fact, there's a chapter in this book about Chestnut Hill College, and if you haven't read it, you might want to. He says that conservatism is a very slippery, malleable word in this book. And in his book, The End of the 20th Century, he said, conservatives don't really care a darn about conserving the land or much of anything else. That is, they tend to be laissez-faire people who want to tear everything up and change everything. So this is why he pronounces himself as a reactionary, not because he thinks there's a golden age in the past, not because he wants to go back to some time in the past, not because he doesn't believe in progress of any sort. In fact, one of the reasons that he's a reactionary is because he says human nature doesn't change, because we're all prone to original sin, which is one of the topics, of course, of his autobiography. He also says that the past is the only thing we can know. We don't know what the future is going to bring, and we don't understand the present. And the past, of course, is one of the ways that we can try to unlock the present and perceive what might be happening in the future. The reason that he talks about human nature not changing explains why he's an anti-anti. He comes from Hungary. He, by the way, was thrown into a camp during World War II because he wouldn't fight in the Hungarian army on the side of the Germans. And then later on, he flees the Soviets who are coming into Eastern Europe. And he went to Vienna. He not only spoke English, but he spoke German, he spoke French, he spoke Italian, he spoke Spanish. He seemed to speak every language imaginable. And he was an interpreter of German war criminals in Austria after World War II, and that's how he gets a visa to come to the United States. But as a Hungarian refugee, many people thought that he was going to scream and carry on about communism. And in his history of the Cold War, he says he's an anti-communist because raging about communism isn't going to do any good. And he says that history is more about old-fashioned geopolitical strategy than it is about ideology. And I think that rings true when we're talking about Ukraine now. It's not so much about communism, it's about Russia going to be like the old Soviet Union. Because he's an anti-anti, he became a friend of George Kennan, who was at Princeton for a number of years. And of course, Princeton is the author of the Doctrine of Containment. And Kennan turned against the idea that we should apply the doctrine of containment to the entire world. It was a big mistake to apply it, for example, to Vietnam. John also believed that being a reactionary made one an old-fashioned patriot and not an aggressive nationalist. In other words, he says, I believe in patriotism, but not in aggressive nationalism. And he liked to talk, too, about his bourgeois values. That is the love of solid family comforts, good manners, dependability, civil discourse, and love of books. It's hard to pin down John politically. He's often voting for Republicans and Democrats, going back and forth between the two. He did not like Ronald Reagan at all. He didn't see him as a real conservative, and he was horrified by the Iran-Contra scandals. And I could go on and on. I'll just make a few concluding remarks about John here. I owe John Lucas a great deal, as do so many of the students who studied in his classes. He encouraged me to write as well as to teach and said there was no conflict between the two of them, that he got ideas from teaching for writing and his writing he could use in the classroom. And so he encouraged me to write as well as to teach. I guess I didn't have any choice but to teach. He talked about ideas, helped me to frame my own ideas when I was writing. And so I'm honored to speak about John Lucas this evening because I owe some to him, a great deal to him. And for years, he represented the excellence of Chestnut Hill College to the rest of the world. So Godspeed, John Lucas, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Contasta. I have a letter from the president of our National Society. She wanted to congratulate you, and I'm going to read that now. Welcome to Phi Alpha Theta, and congratulations on your acceptance into the National History Honor Society for colleges and universities. As a member, you are entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining the scholastic, professional, and ethical standards of the Honor Society. Your membership in Phi Alpha Theta is lifetime, and there are no annual dues. In addition to the certificate that you will receive today, you will also receive a one-year subscription for digital journals to our quarterly scholarly journal, The Historian. Following your induction, you will receive an email from the Historian publisher, Taylor and Francis, with login instructions. As a Phi Alpha Theta member, you can apply for the Honor Society's awards and scholarships offered each year. For a detailed listing of our extensive awards and scholarships, visit our website, Prizes and Awards section. All student members can present a paper at Phi Alpha Theta's biennial convention or at a regional meeting in your area. For more information on our meetings, please visit our website's meeting section. To learn more about Phi Alpha Theta and get the most out of your membership, visit us on the web and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Once again, welcome and congratulations on your outstanding achievement. Sincerely, Dr. Deborah A. Mulligan. She sent along also this list of prizes and awards, and since the last time we were up here, they've added a few. And I just wanted to point out, I teach the senior seminar, and there are some very good papers that are being shaped up. And one of the prizes is for a paper prize award, just so you know, for graduate and undergraduate students who have written outstanding papers. And I would really encourage you to think about submitting, especially if I tell you they're really good. The entries should be received by July 4th of this year. So I think that's something to think about. The society is very rich in symbolism, and I wanted to share that with you right now. And I call upon Grace, who is one of our society officers. And Grace, if we could begin with lighting. We are very careful. We will not burn you down. Okay. Let me help you. We'll try not to burn you down. All right. Okay. The symbolism of the society is a star, a serpent, the colors, and the flower. The six-pointed star, which is composed of two triangles, is worked in black and laid on a circular frame, the whole encircled by a serpent. That which governs the universe may be thought of as having three attributes: parenthood, spirit of life, and reason, which are symbolized by one of the triangles. Ancient philosophers believed that people and the world were made of three elements: spirit, blood, and water. These are represented by the second triangle of the star. The triangle with the apex below the base symbolizes the guiding principles of the universe. The Greek letter pi signifies prognos, for parenthood. The letter psi signifies psyche, for spirit of life. The letter lambda signifies logos, for reason. The triangle with the apex above the base symbolizes the earthly and the human. The letter alpha signifies ema, for blood. The letter ipsilon signifies idor, for water. The letter psi signifies psyche, for spirit of life. The union of these two triangles forming the six-pointed star, the ancient Assyrian sign of divinity, symbolizes the intimate connection, the relationship of the infinite and the human. By some ancient peoples, the serpent was regarded as a symbol of eternity, good fortune, and plenty. In our symbolism, the serpent signifies happiness, fruitfulness, and eternity. Superimposed on the black within the two triangles are the three letters: pi, alpha, theta, philia, anthropos, theos, signifying love, humanity, and God. The colors of our society also denote the relation between the human and the infinite. The red symbolizes the blood, which is essential to human life, while the blue symbolizes the sky, which to many ancient peoples signified the divine. The flower, a deep red rose, symbolizes beauty, charm, and fervency. Thank you. Since you, as students of human thought and action, have expressed a desire to contribute and to continue upon the high paths of history, and since your predecessors have found you worthy to share such privileges, it is with great pleasure that we initiate you into the Alpha Et Psi chapter of Phi Alpha Theta, a society dedicated to the service of history. Now, you know that the Greeks deemed Clio worthy of the highest place among the muses. You also know the immeasurability of time and the imperfection of human understanding. Before the beginning of history, time stretched back throughout unknown eons. The future lies ahead in equally unknown vistas. Within this immense span of eternity, historic time is only but a brief period. The study of the past may be divided into 6 great ages. Of these, 4 have disappeared, having left everlasting impressions on civilization. The 5th is the present, while the last, the future, lies ahead to be known and judged by generations yet unborn. I am the spokesperson for the prehistoric age. In the prehistoric age, societies were formed as people learned to make fire, improve their tools and weapons, domesticate animals, raise cereals, weave coarse cloth, construct crude permanent shelters, create art, and develop religious experiences, expressions. As their numbers increased, they evolved larger and more complex societies with institutions of government. With the introduction of agriculture and the commencement of trade, people created a system of enduring human relationship. When at last they learned to record their deeds and desires in writing, they passed from the prehistoric to the ancient age.
I am the spokesperson for the ancient age. Early societies in China, India, the Middle East, the Mediterranean world, Africa, and the Americas built cities and created powerful states and empires, which were sustained by increased control over the natural environment and a regimentation of society. With steadily increasing religious, political, and economic specialization, social hierarchies appeared. Through reason and speculation, the conceptual realms of religion, ethics, philosophy, and science developed. In the teachings of the philosophers and prophets, individuals learned to understand and transcend the inequities of life, and to perceive the order permeating the universe. In the latter centuries of the ancient age, the great empires of the Afro-Eurasian world experienced political, social, and economic disintegration in the face of numerous challenges. With the collapse of the Han Dynasty in China and the decline of the Roman Empire and the fall of India's Gupta Empire, the ancient Afro-Eurasian world passed away. The Americas, however, were unaffected by these changes.
I am the spokesperson for the medieval age. The medieval age began when folk migrations challenged the classical civilizations of Europe and Asia. As the political powers of the great empires declined, new forces emerged. The great religions of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Confucianism spread beyond the lands of their birth to bring the majority of the inhabitants of the earth into an understanding of the essentially ethical nature of human life. In China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, India, Africa, the Americas, and the Near and Middle East, rich civilizations arose and achieved stability. Western Europe, however, remained for several centuries a land of instability and conflict. Ideals constantly outstripped practice. The dream of a united Christendom and civilized behavior sharply contrasted with the reality of numerous contending states and the brutalities of feudal warfare. Displays of great power and wealth stood beside a general and harsh poverty of the masses, yet the germ of a more stable, refined, and prosperous civilization in Europe was alive in the abstract pondering of scholars, in the general technological and mechanical orientations of Western society, and the appearance of new expressions of human endeavor, universities, capitalism, representative assemblies, and constitutional government. A new dynamism was evident, which heralded the coming of the early modern age.
I am the spokesperson for the early modern age. During the 400 years of this age, national states arose in Europe, America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and society divided into an increasing number of social classes. Capitalism, emerging from its primitive beginnings, became a dominant feature of Western civilization. Contact was established between isolated continents of the world, and in successive waves of imperialism, Europeans carried both the virtues and vices of their civilization to all corners of the globe. In the wake of these enlarged activities came revolutions in ideas, institutions, and practices. No aspect of life, religion, family structure, economic activity, political systems, or culture was left untouched. Great progress was made in material benefits, but often this was at the expense of the significant dislocation of human lives, the suppression of peoples, the ravaging of natural environments, cultural tensions and resentments between peoples, and the intensification of ideological conflicts. Further, concentration on material well-being led to a growing secularization of society. All of these developments would pose serious challenges for the world during the contemporary age.
I am the spokesperson for the contemporary age. At the beginning of the contemporary age, it seemed that the ideals of democracy would soon be achieved throughout the world, and that the horrors of war, which had haunted humanity since the beginning of recorded time, would soon be ended forever by an era of perpetual peace and international cooperation. These hopes were dashed by 2 world wars and numerous smaller conflicts, which resulted in untold misery and serious economic and social dislocations. The development of the Cold War, the end of colonialism, and the emergence of the Third World brought an ever-increasing complexity of internal and international relations. All of this tended to promote pessimism and widespread unrest. Nevertheless, the contemporary age has been rich in spiritual values and has had a great thirst for reform and civil rights. The Berlin Wall has been torn down, communism compromised in many places, and the Cold War brought to an abrupt end. People have practiced humanitarianism on a scale greater than anything known in any other era, and the horizons of human understanding and learning have been widened immeasurably. Globally, great problems still remain: bitter ethnic feuds, new outbreaks of racism, continuing concerns about sexual discrimination, barbaric violations of human rights, more devastating machines of war, ecological challenges, of great magnitude and the dehumanizing effects of certain modern technologies. In the midst of these tensions, the historian believes that individuals and nations may approach nearer to the end of harmonizing responsibility with freedom through the study of the human experience of the past, which will afford content and wisdom for our lives in the future age.
I'm a spokesperson for the future age. You've now passed through 5 ages of the past, and where the path leads in the future, no one can predict. The pessimists may be right. Tensions among nations and power blocks, backed by new material and technological advances, could bring about the destruction of civilized society. The previous ages have demonstrated that nationalism, racism, and sex discrimination are long-enduring problems. Therefore, they must be monitored constantly until permanent, yet unknown solutions are evolved. The pessimist sees this delayed into the distant future, but the optimist sees it as just over the horizon, where the human race may succeed in producing a civilization immeasurably more peaceful and finer than any the world has yet seen, an age in which may be realized the universal humanity.
It is toward this great goal that the historian must constantly strive. To you, worthy students of history, this challenge is offered so that, in part through your own efforts, the future may become the world's greatest age. As new members, you will be expected to live up to the ideals of Phi Alpha Theta, keeping in mind the 3 important forces contained in the words philia, anthropos, theos: love, humanity, and God. Among the invaluable lessons that may be learned from the study of history and the ideals of this society are the spirit of respect, which inculcates a sincere regard for the rights of each individual to freedom, the belief in the community of all persons, which renders abhorrent all ideas that tend to foment national hatreds, racial and sexual discrimination, and all forms of injustice. The need for historians to search for truth and to accept the responsibility for making decisions in terms of their meaning for others as well as for themselves. So I ask you to stand now, the new members. Do you accept this challenge of striving to live up to these ideals of Phi Alpha Theta? Yes, great, okay. I am pleased to welcome you now as newly initiated members of the Alpha Edip Psi chapter of Phi Alpha Theta. And please step forward as I call your name to receive your certificate. Let me get around here. And your Justin, name. it's really no small accomplishment, and I'm really so very happy to be able to honor you today. Phi Alpha Theta is a professional society which promotes the study of history through the encouragement of research, excellence in teaching, publication, and the exchange of learning among historians and students. It seeks to bring students and faculty together, both intellectually and socially, for mutual understanding and encouragement in their common interest and love for history. Through classes, through seminars, through society-sponsored lectures, films, and field trips. And I would just like to highlight that this afternoon, if Grace could just tell us what went on here on campus.
The History Club and Student Life were very honored to host a Holocaust survivor to speak to the college today.
Okay. And you recognize how important that is because our survivors are becoming fewer and fewer, and we need to hear their words while they are still with us. And so we have brought to campus several times different survivors, and it's wonderful that you were still able to. I'd like to call upon our society officers at this point to share very briefly with you the substance of research projects that came out of different seminars. Grace Welsh, who will be speaking briefly about a project that came out of her research methods seminar on John Wilkes Booth, as she tells us, a look into this very complex person and the complex motivations that turned him from an actor into infamous assassin. Good title, I like that one. And Rachel Yannick, who from her historiography seminar last semester produced another very wonderful piece of historical scholarship, which was a gendered analysis of the historiography of early modern witchcraft. So I'd like to call them to the podium to just speak to you, very briefly, just about the kinds of things that they have a passion for that are interesting to them.
So like Dr. Kuhn said, my paper came out of our historiography class. And just briefly, historiography is the study of history as a discipline. So it studies the change in interpretations of past events through the eyes of different historians. So for this essay, I looked at the historiography of early modern witchcraft with a gendered view of it. And I looked specifically at changing ideas and approaches to the scholarship on witchcraft in the early modern period, specifically analyzing how scholars viewed the victims of that time. So in the 1970s, Keith Thomas and Alan McFarlane were really the first to write on this topic, and at the time, there was not a lot written. And the two came up with the prevailing archetype of what a witch looks like, that they were usually female, elderly, and were often widows. Thomas and McFarlane argued that witches were the socially and economically marginalized in society. Many that were accused of witchcraft were women. At this time, due to changes in society, women were more likely to end up as beggars because of their societal positions. Many people resented these women and projected the ideas of witchcraft on them. For many years, their ideas were accepted without much backlash. And at the same time, there was a woman writing in the 1970s, Andrea Dworkin, and she wrote a book called Woman Hating, and she discussed the idea of early modern witchcraft through a gendered lens. And she says that women were mostly the ones accused of witchcraft, largely for bewitching men. Women held certain characteristics at the time, it was believed, that made them more prone to these accusations, that they were lustful, impressionable, gossipers, and unintelligent. Dworkin argues that witch hunts were something that were almost exclusively done towards women by a patriarchal society. She struggles to confront the fact that almost 20% of the accusations of witchcraft were brought against men. And this is a question that really won't be taken seriously by scholars for another 30 years. So then in 1984 and 1995, respectively, Christina Larner and Louise Jackson grappled with the idea of witch hunting as women hunting, and they both believed it was. Larner believed that women threatened men with the only power that they had that men did not, the ability to bear children, and witches threatened the existing social order. Older women were often prosecuted for things like unofficial healing and having a disorderly house, while younger women were prosecuted for things like infanticide and prostitution. These accusations revolved around things that occurred in women's spheres. Yes, so these accusations revolved around things that happened in women's spheres. And so for Larner, this really reinforced the idea that it was misogyny, furthered by this patriarchal society, that led to women being accused. Jackson agreed with Larner later in 1995. She thought that witch trials promoted women as threatening and violent and a harm to society. Women at the time were said to be vulnerable to the devil, where they derived their powers from because of their lustful natures. It wasn't until 2003 with Laura Apps and Andrew Gow for the focus to shift when looking at the victims of early modern witch hunts. They tried to answer the question of how early modern Europeans made sense of male witches. One of their theories was that male witches were feminized. An essential feature of the witch is that they had a subservient relationship to the devil, who tricked people into worshiping him. Thus, witches were weak-minded, and this was a trait that was traditionally associated with witches since antiquity. This was also a trait that was closely associated with women. Thus, male witches were implicitly feminized. But Apps and Gow also believed that early modern Europeans would have been familiar with the idea of men as witches. Early Christians often charged heretics as witches, which would have been known in the early modern period. Heresy was not linked to a specific gender. Thus, they believed there might be a link between heretics and witches to explain this existence of these male victims. In addition, there were writings of male magic users that would have been circulated in the early modern period, in addition to biblical texts that referenced male magic users. Medieval sources and society also gave examples of male magic users, which would have been known to people at that time. Thus, Apps and Gow tried to explain why 20% of all witches accused were men. They thought people in this period would not have entirely linked the practice of magic to gender based on historical ideas of men and women as magic users. Their discussion of male witches changed how historians discuss the victims of the early modern witch hunts, a conversation that's still debated today.
As Dr. Kuhn said, I wrote my paper for, that's not working. Hello. I wrote my paper for research methods on John Wilkes Booth and the complex motivations that turned him from a famous actor into an infamous assassin. Okay. So my thesis was that the pride John Wilkes took in his family name, especially with his illegitimate status, along with his Southern sympathies, compounded in a desire to be a part of something bigger than himself, to be a part of history, in order to live up to the greatness of the Booth family name. These complex motivations culminated in John Wilkes' fatal decision to President Lincoln in Ford's Theater. Oh, I can't move from this, sorry. So John Wilkes Booth was the 9th of 10 children born to famous actor Junius Brutus Booth and his mistress Mary Ann Booth. Because they were not legally married, John Wilkes and his siblings did not have the legal right to carry the Booth name, which was a fact hidden from John Wilkes until he was around 8 years old, when Junius's first wife came upon the scene and caused a big scandal. So at this time, John Wilkes was the oldest man in the house. His older brothers and his father were away working, so he really faced a lot of the social consequences of this scandal getting out, where he was not a legitimate child. So because he took such great pride in how famous the Booth name was, it really affected him in the fact that he was not allowed to carry it, and now he was being told that he wasn't worthy of the name in itself. And this wounded pride would carry with him for the rest of his life. So we know that John Wilkes was an actor. Debates vary on how good of an actor he was. And due to this and how famous the Booth family name was in the American theaters, John Wilkes actually acted under an alias for the first several years of his career So again, once more, he's being told that he is not worthy of the Booth family name. So he's really determined to prove himself worthy of not only the Booth name, but his father's legacy, and that he would establish himself as a person who would be known. So at the time, John Wilkes Booth was growing up in Maryland, which was a border state, so it was really embroiled in the conflict between slavery and abolitionists. So John Wilkes Booth is growing up in this time where there's such a divide. And while his father really, unfortunately, the circumstances of just the society and various events in his childhood did eventually convince Booth that slavery was the choice he wanted to support. He also acted a lot more in the South compared to the North, so he was very much exposed to the racial hierarchy in the South, so he really sympathized with the cause for slavery against abolitionist movements. So John Wilkes Booth's first taste of part of history was when he was involved in the capture and execution of the abolitionist John Brown. John Wilkes Booth will claim that he was actually part of the team who arrested John Brown, but this was not true. He was just part of the militia group that guarded John Brown while he awaited execution, and even in this, he sort of just snuck into it. But he really got a taste of camaraderie and being a part of something while he was with these militiamen guarding this person who was such a key figure in society at the time. So he really got a taste of being part of something bigger than himself, and it was intoxicating. So this is something that he will keep in mind later as he gets more involved with politics and more important events in history. Ooh, yeah. John Wilkes Booth was really against Abraham Lincoln. This was not an unusual opinion. He just took it obviously way too far. But Lincoln at the time was a controversial president. During his terms, people saw him as too weak, too lenient, or too harsh, depending on which side of the argument you were on. So John Wilkes, seeing him as an American Caesar bent on creating an American empire, was not unusual. He ended up taking it further than anyone else had tried before. John Wilkes Booth actually had an idea before he does kill Lincoln to capture the president while he was on his way to a soldier's home. He ends up roping a bunch of other people into the idea, hoping that they can capture the president, take him to the Confederate States, and ransom him in an effort to reestablish the soldier's trade. That's not the word, and I'm sorry. Yeah. He actually brings up the idea of doing it in a theater, so his eventual plan of killing Lincoln in a theater was not new to John Wilkes. It is just interesting that he brings it up so early into his conspiracy plans. The conspiracy does fail because Lincoln just ends up changing his plans, but we see John Wilkes is really intent on making a name for himself in history and doing something to help the Confederate cause. It is in April of 1865 that John Wilkes Booth realizes if he's going to act in the name of the Confederacy, that he has to act now. So on April 14th, he ends up getting word that Lincoln's going to be at Ford's Theater, so he gets a plot ready that night. It was not premeditated. He just comes up with it then, and the idea was to not only take out Lincoln, but a couple other top government officials in the Union in an effort to allow the Confederates to rise up in that chaos. Lincoln is the only one that's successfully assassinated, but we do have one other person wounded. And then as we know, after the assassination, John Wilkes Booth runs away and is on the run for a couple days. We know from his diary that he is not regretful or remorseful of his choices in any way. He actually thought he was justified, but he is eventually captured and killed in the process. There are limitations to studying a person as complex as John Wilkes Booth because as infamous as he is in American history, a lot of our sources are from after the fact that after the assassination of the president. So that really does lead bias to any testimonies we have remaining. So to find unbiased documents and sources was difficult to obtain. But John Wilkes Booth was a man who desired to be worthy of the name that his illegitimate status denied him. He wanted to be worthy of his famous father, and he wanted to be a part of history. He did this, and he immortalized himself in American history when he shot President Lincoln in Ford's Theater. So we'll never really forget him. So he did achieve what he went out to do, even if it wasn't a great way to do it. Thank you.
Hello to you both, and I would encourage you to speak with Grace and Rachel following our service here about these very intriguing topics and works of, clearly, masterful works of historical scholarship. I'm proud of you both. As we close this service today, I would like to honor 3 seniors who will be graduating in May. And we have on our court, in red, the colors of society.